All right, by this point, you should have a graphing calculator. Mine is a TI-84 Plus Silver Edition. Yours might look a little bit different from mine. No big deal if it does. It just means that your buttons are going to look a little bit different sometimes, but totally fine if you don't have the exact same model as me. So we are going to look at just some basics of how to use this thing. I'm not really going to write much on this sheet. I'm mostly just using it as like a reference for myself so that I make sure I hit all the big things. You may want to, like, as you go through, just like write down a couple of little notes for yourself about what each one does. Like if you're not sure, you're going to remember it or something. But I'm not really going to write much down. I'm just going to show you how to push buttons. Okay. So this is going to seem a little bit silly because I'm literally just going to show you how to push buttons. But these calculators do some really cool things. And there's some really handy features that you should know about. So we're going to go over a little more than half the page today. We're not going to finish all of it in this one video, but I want to show you just some of the basic things that you should be able to do, okay? So first of all, say that you are typing something and you accidentally mess something up on it, okay? So you have a mistake that you need to fix. How do we fix that? So say we were doing 5 and you put, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to hit enter. Okay, so you put in 5 plus 12, and you meant to be, you're like, oh man, that was supposed to be a 22, not a 12. Man, I wish I could go back and fix that. You got a few options. You could use your clear button to clear the whole thing if you wanted to, and then just retype it over. You could hit enter, get your answer, and just type it over again. This is a pretty easy minor mistake. Okay, but sometimes you're gonna have a much longer, more complicated equation, and that's where this comes in handy. So what you can do is you can actually go back over using your arrow key to where the number that's a mistake is, and then just type whatever it was supposed to be. So if this case, if I wanted it to be a 22, I'm going to type a 2, and then you're going to see that it's going to replace it, and now I've got 5 plus 22. You're going to hit enter to get the answer. You don't need to go all the way back to the end to get the answer. You can just hit enter wherever, and it'll give it for you. Okay, so that's a really cool feature. And it would be really helpful for something like if you're doing a longer equation. So like say you're doing 3 times 5 plus 7 times 4 minus 3 or something like this. And you're like, oh man, that 5 was supposed to be a 6. I hit the wrong button, right? Well, instead of going back and redoing the whole thing, you can just go over, type that 6 where it's supposed to be, and there you go. Okay, so that's the first thing, how to type over a mistake. Second thing, there are 2 different buttons on here. Most calculators, the negative and the minus sign are interchangeable. That is not the case with your graphing calculator. This guy is your minus sign, and down here is your negative button. Okay, so it's down here by the enter button. You cannot use them interchangeably. Okay, so if I want to do 3 plus negative 1, if you do 3 plus and you use the minus sign 1, you're going to get an error message. Okay, so it's going to tell you that there's a syntax error. Okay, you can either quit out of this screen, or if you use go to, so if I go down to 2 and hit go to, it'll take you to exactly what your problem is. So I can see, oh, it's that minus sign. Oh, right, that's right. I was supposed to use my negative button. So I'm going to come down here and push this negative button instead. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust this camera so you can see the whole thing at the same time. That's better. Okay, so that's what that's going to look like. And just as a comparison, the buttons do look different. There's the negative sign versus the minus sign. They look a little bit different on your screen, so you can kind of tell the difference. Okay, so that's an important thing. Make sure you use the negative sign, not the minus button. ANS, short for answer. Okay, so see above the negative sign, there's that ANS right there. Okay, on my calculator, it's blue. And see how it matches this blue second button? They're the same color. Okay, so what you're gonna do is anytime you see something written in whatever color, and depending on the calculator, the colors are a little bit different. Mine uses blue and green. Some calculators have different colors. It doesn't make a difference. They'll always correspond. But if I want to use this answer feature, okay, I use second and then that answer thing. Okay, so say you do a whole bunch of calculations, and then I need to say, okay, well, I got this answer, and then I need to multiply it by 5. Okay, well, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. If you just hit times, you're going to notice that it pops up this ANS. That stands for your previous answer. So if I just do times and then 5, it's automatically going to take that 2 and multiply it by 5. Okay, now, not a huge deal here. It would have been just as easy to type the 2. But what if we were doing some really big fraction and you got this crazy decimal and you need to multiply that by 5? Well, if you just copy over the decimal or if you round, your answer is not going to be terribly precise. So this is where you'd want to use your answer feature and multiply it by 5. Okay, so that's how you do that. Okay, well, that's great if the first thing you need to do is start with the answer. But what if I was doing it in the other order? Like, what if I needed to do 1 minus that answer? Okay, well, I would do the 1 minus. How do you get the answer in there? Well, like we said, see how this color corresponds to that button color? So when you push this second button, you're going to notice it switches to a little arrow here. And then when I hit the minus sign, instead of giving a negative sign, it's going to give me ANS, so my previous answer. So that's going to do 1 minus my previous answer. Okay, that is going to be super essential for you as we go through here. You're going to need to be able to do that answer button because it's really going to help with your precision, and our precision is going to be really important in this class. All right, so that's the answer function. The next thing you got is this entry thing here, okay? So say we were doing a table of values and you were doing it out the long way, so we needed to do 3 times x minus 1. So I'm going to say pretend x was 0 minus 1, and then times, again, 0 plus 5. So we're plugging in 0 for x into our intercept form equation, and we get our answer, okay? Well, now I want to plug 1 in. I could retype the whole thing, or I can use my entry key. So the entry key is above the enter sign. So mine's in blue, so that's my second button again. So whatever color yours is, it's still going to be your second button. So I'm going to do second and enter. And what's going to happen is it's just going to copy that last line exactly, but it's going to let me type on it. Okay, and then I can just go back over and say, okay, I wanted this 0 now to be a 1. And I want this 0 to now be a 1 as well. And then I can answer and get my answer. There we go. Okay, now depending on which calculator you have, some of them you can also use the up arrow and go back onto the line and hit enter and it'll bring it down. Mine doesn't do that. If I push the up arrow, it doesn't do anything. Just depends on what your OS is, what your operating system is in the calculator, whether it'll let you or not. You might be able to, you might not. Just depends. Okay, so second and then entry, that's a really, really nice one. And then I could do it again if I wanted to plug in, say, 2 for my table of values. Right? And there you go. Okay, so that's a really convenient thing to be able to do. All right, well, we've talked about how do we go back and replace a number, but what if you mess something up? So what if we're doing like 3 times 5 times 10, and then you realize, oh, that doesn't make sense. Oh man, I forgot to put the 1 in front of the 0. How can we add that 1 back in? Well, I can use second entry to pull up that line again. But if I try to go back and put the 1 in here, it's going to replace everything. And actually, why don't we say, what if we need to make this a 13 instead? Let's do that. So if I needed to make this a 13, when I go to put the 1 at the front, it gets rid of my 3. And if I try to type in the 3, it's going to get rid of my 5, my multiplication, right? So how do we deal with that? Well, here's what we would do. Oops. Oh, that's right. Sorry. Hang on. I could hit enter again. When you do the second entry feature, you can also scroll back through. So if I do second entry, I'm going to get that one. Without hitting enter, if you do it again, it's going to give you the thing you typed before that. Without hitting enter, if you do it again, it's the thing you typed before that. Okay, so you can use that to kind of track back through if you like did a calculation somewhere and you want to see what it was. Just keep doing second entry, but don't hit enter in between. Watson, hey. Okay, so anyway, back to the problem at hand. So I'm doing second entry to pull this up, and I want to put that 1 in the front. Well, above your delete key right here, see it says INS? That's short for insert. Okay, so what that's going to do, it's in blue, so again, my second button. So I hit second once, and then that delete key. And you're going to notice that the cursor changes a little bit. Now it's flashing, and I can see the number, whereas before it was that thick square. Now, when I start typing, it's going to let me type in those numbers without overwriting. And I can type in as many as I want. I don't want that many, but I could type them all in. Okay, and to get out of that mode, just use one of your left or right arrow keys, and notice that now it switched back to a normal cursor. So now if I try typing numbers in, it's going to overwrite again. Okay, but I don't want those, so I'm going to just go ahead and delete all of those. There's my 13 and my answer. Okay, so that's your insert key, and that lets you put things back in that you forgot without overwriting. All right, next one. I told you it's going to be a lot of button pushing, right? Okay, so the next one is how do you do a square root? Well, your square root button, if you find it, is right here. So this is your x squared button. Right above it is your square root button. So again, I want my second key because that's what the square root is. So I'm going to do second square root, and then you can just type in whatever number. So the square root of 16, 4. Okay, if I want to do square root of a negative number, remember we talked about how that's not possible? That's going to be another thing that's going to give you an error. It tells you it's that there's a non-real answer. It's an imaginary answer. You can either quit, or if you choose go to, it's going to take you back to where your problem was, which in this case is the negative 4. Okay. Notice that this automatically puts parentheses in for you when you do a square root. If that's the only thing that you're doing in the line, you don't really have to close them. If you want to have the square root of 9, whether I put the closed parentheses there or not, doesn't make a difference. But what if you needed to do the square root of 9 times 2? If I type in square root of 9 times 2 without the parentheses, that's what I'm going to get for the answer. If I type in square root of 9 times 2 with the parentheses, I get a different answer because this is following order of operations. Order of operations says you do things in parentheses first, right? So in this bottom one, it's taking the square root first and then multiplying by 2. This guy, since you didn't close your parentheses, it's assuming you want them at the end. So it's doing the 9 times 2 first and then square rooting. So you just got to make sure you watch out for parentheses and close them when needed. All right, exponents. So exponents is our next thing in our list. If you want to just raise something to the second power, so like 9 to the second power, you can use this button right here that looks like x squared. That'll just throw in a little 2 for you and you're all set. Okay, but if you want to do something with a bigger exponent like 3 or 4 or 5, then you have to use what we call the caret button. That's this guy over here below clear. Okay, so it's called the caret button. I'm not really sure why we call it the caret button, but we do. Okay, and when you push this, one of two things is going to happen. On this particular calculator, it shows up just looking like a caret button, which is totally fine. That's just how it looks. Okay, and then you type whatever exponent you want. So 9 to the third power is 729. Okay, so that is one way that they will look sometimes. Okay, the other option is, sorry, this is going to be a little bit small, but if I try to do it on here, when I push that button, you can kind of see that it actually hops you up. So there's no caret button. It hops you up to where the exponent is, and then you can type whatever it is. And when you're ready to get out of the exponent, so like if you need to do 9 to the third minus 1, just push your arrow button over to get back down to normal level. And then you can finish off the rest of it. Okay, so it's just a slightly different operating system difference. Okay, so that's how you're going to do your exponents. Last of these guys is going to be your absolute value. So how do you do absolute value? That is actually in this math menu. There's no button for it, but if you click this math button up here, you're going to see there's a lot of different things in here. This top one changes things to fractions. That's kind of actually a really useful one. So say you do a problem out, you get an answer, you want to turn it into a fraction. Hopefully you already know that 0.25 is equal to a quarter, but if you weren't sure, you do math, choose that top option that changes things to fractions, hit enter, it's a fourth. So that's a really handy one to know. But other things in here, this is raising to the third power. I don't know why you would ever use that, to be quite honest. You'd use the caret button. It's faster and easier. Cube root right there. This would be if you want a square root of something other than a power of 3. So if you want like a fourth root or a fifth root, we'll talk about those later. Function minimums, function maximums. A lot of this stuff we're not really going to use this year. Okay, so you don't really have to worry about that. What we are going to look at is if you go over to the number menu. So use your sideways arrows to go back and forth along these top menus. And the top part, ABS, that is absolute value. So if you needed to take an absolute value for whatever reason, that's what you would use. Realistically speaking, you're not just going to calculate an absolute value. This is something that you'd more use if you were graphing it. So if you needed to graph it, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, this is how you get to absolute value. All right, great. If I need to get out of this menu, see above the mode button, it says quit. So I'm going to use second mode, and that'll quit me back to your normal screen. Okay, you can always use that anytime. All right, clear button wipes everything on your screen. Difference really quick between clear and delete. Okay, if I have something typed out and I go over onto something and hit delete, it's just going to delete the one thing I'm on top of. If I hit clear, it gets rid of everything. Okay, so that's the difference between those two buttons. All right, so now let's take a look at the graphing part of your graphing calculator. We're not going to do all of this today. I'm just going to show you the basics. Okay, so first off, y equals button up here. That's where you want to go anytime you want to graph something. So I'm going to go into y equals. You can see here I already have an equation that I was graphing earlier for something else. I'm just going to go ahead and clear that out. So I'm going to hit the clear button to clear everything out. All right, and then this is where I'm going to type any equations that I need graphed. So say we want to graph y equals x squared. Okay, so the first thing we need is an x. Now, you may have already noticed if you've been kind of exploring, there's a little X above this store button up here. Mine's in green. That is not the one we want. That does something a little bit different. Okay, the one that you want to use anytime you need a variable for graphing something is this button right here, the xt theta n button. Okay, so we're going to use that. That's going to get me my x. It doesn't make a difference which one you use. And then say I want to do squared, so I'm just going to use my x squared button just to graph this one. Okay, so now what I want to do is graph this. Now, when I hit graph, my window is going to be all crazy somewhere else. That's okay. Yours might look a little bit different when you do this, but it'll just for a second. Okay, so I had changed my viewing window to look at something else, and you can kind of see there's a little something over here. That's kind of where my graph is, but I need to adjust this so I can see a little bit better. So that is what this zoom button is for. So this zoom button in the middle, when you go into this, there's a lot of different options. Okay, the big ones that I use are usually option 6, Z standard. That's going to take you back to a normal screen. Okay, and then later we're going to look at zoom stat and zoom fit. So we'll look at those kind of later. But for right now, I want option 6. You can either go down to where the 6 is and hit enter, or you can just push the 6 key. So I'm just going to push 6 on here. And now this probably looks like what yours looks like if it's a factory out of the box. This is just a standard window. It's a 10 by 10. So this is -10, that's +10, +10, -10. There's my parabola. Okay, now right next to the zoom button is the window button. Okay, so if I click the window button, this is going to give you some information about what you can see. Okay, so if you need to adjust your graph, using those zoom options does not always work out well. Okay, so if I need to adjust my graph, this is where I'm going to do it. I can tell it what I want my x min and x max to be. So like when I'm looking at this guy, I'm noticing there's a bunch of dead space, right? All this space over here, there's nothing interesting happening here. And all this space over here, nothing interesting happening. Even down here, this is all dead space. So let's say I want to cut that off. So I want to change my graph, and I'm just going to make it go like here. So let's see, say we'll go from like +5 to -5 on the x-axis, and I want my y-axis to start at, -2 and go up. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my window. I want my x minimum, so on my x-axis, the smallest x value is going to be -5, negative button, not the minus, remember. And I want the largest x value to be +5. Okay, this x scale, that tells you what you're counting by. So you know how sometimes you'll draw a graph and you count by like 2s or something when you're numbering your axes? That's what this is. I just want it to count by 1s, so that's good. All right, so if I graph what I have so far, you can see that now all that dead space has been cut off on the sides. It makes your graph look a little bit different, but that's just because you can see more of it. It's a little bit more spread out. Okay, so now I want to chop off this bottom part here. So we said we wanted the y to start at -2. So I'm going to go back to my window, and I want my smallest y value to now be -2. My biggest y value is 10, and the y scale, it's counting by 1s. Okay, down here, there's also an XRES, and some calculators have a couple other options. I've honestly never adjusted that in my life. It has to do with like the pixelation of the screen. Just leave it alone. You don't have to worry about it. Just worry about your X min, X max, Y min, Y max. Maybe sometimes you'd mess with your scale, but honestly, for the most part, I just leave it. Okay, so now if I graph this, you're going to see that it's cut off a little bit more, and there's my nice pretty parabola. Okay, all right, that is all that we're going to hit in this video. It has gone on long enough. I told you this is going to be a little bit boring, right? It's just pushing a lot of buttons. Okay, so now you've kind of seen some of the features that this calculator does. We're going to talk more about what you can do with a graph in the next video. Feel free to go back and rewatch this if you need to just double check on anything, or if you can't figure out a way to do something, or if you're thinking to yourself, man, doing this is so hard in the calculator, shoot me an email or something and we can definitely talk about it because there's probably an easier way to do it.